Hi, I'm Eric Malo, ABC News. I'm joined by former NBA All Star and the league's all time leading 3 point shooter, Ray Allen. You won championships in Boston and Miami in 2008 and 2013. Your second title coming after making one of the most dramatic shots in league history against the San Antonio Spurs in Game 6. You also played for the Milwaukee Bucks, Seattle Supersonics, and last appeared in the league in 2014. And today you have a new autobiography, From the Outside, My Journey Through Life and the Game I Love. You're a former professional athlete, actor, and now an author. Ray Allen, welcome to ABC Radio.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. It took me through a lot. It took me
Mm.
through a lot of different times, remembering your career and just what, not only you, but your time in the NBA, what it meant for the league itself. Because when you were with the Knicks, it seemed like there wasn't a bigger story in sports at that time than when you were in Boston. And I was hoping you can just reflect on what you reflected on in this book about your time in Boston and the energy that brought to the league. Something that I haven't seen it probably in my life in the NBA.
Well, first, thank you for having me on your show.
Mm,
I'm so humbled to be able to, put, my life together. Although there's so much that's not in the book, but
mm,
be able to talk about my journey through this game that I've played and this game that I've loved, and not just basketball, but I did so many things in my life. Played so many different sports, and my dad was in the Air Force, so I traveled, so many different places. So just making it to the NBA.
mhm.
When we talk about what we did in college and what I did in high school and what it took me to get from each level to the next. Most people, it's interesting. Nobody knew me when I played in Milwaukee or Seattle. They heard of me. Some people who were fans would know me, but until I got to Boston, Boston was when it really shot to a whole nother level.
Mhm.
And some people assumed I had only been in the league for like 2 or 3 years at that point. But Boston certainly was probably, such a historic rise
Mhm.
and run to win a championship in 2008 and to really be at the head of the class in the NBA. It's such a amazing journey
Mhm.
for not only me but the guys that I play with, the organization, and the fans.
Well, we were just talking before we went live. You live in Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut, and you went to UConn.
Hmm.
And in this autobiography, you talk a lot about your journey starting all the way back in middle school and how you moved around a lot when you were younger. And one of the things you talked about was some of the discipline it gave you, specifically your father being in the military. In one line, you said the faith you gained from being around the military helped you become more disciplined in playing basketball and in focusing. And you weren't much of a partier, and you talked about never feeling you truly belonged before you really started to star in basketball. Can you delve a little deeper into some of the things you experienced growing up and how they affected you through the rest of your life and NBA career?
Well, as a military dependent, you travel all over the world. Um, we moved every 3 years, and so we picked up and we left.
Mm,
Friends people you got to know is all of a sudden your turnover rate was every 3 years, and we had to learn how to make new friends. You had to learn how to fit in, and oftentimes, sports bonded all of us. Ultimately, when I got to South Carolina, it was like the first time that I went to school off base,
mm,
and it was a different crop of kids that I had to kind of fit in with, and I was always seen as the kid, the outsider. There are kids that knew me, the kids that didn't know me, the ones that didn't like me. It was a whole spectrum that I had to deal with of different ideologies, and obviously, still being 12, 13 years old anywhere in the world is certainly a challenge. So so many lessons that I just had to learn
mm,
early on in life. And what I had to do was, I just played sports and I stuck to that.
mm,
And that's when the love um, for me as a person, people started to develop these bonds with me. And I understood that in order to be a part of something, I always knew I was a part of something.
mm,
The military helped me realize I was part of a team.
mm,
Uh, Operation Desert Shield started, I think it was 1990, 91. I was on a military base, and a lot of men that I played basketball with went to the Middle East, and so I saw firsthand what was happening, and I realized how it affected my life. And so I always knew that we all played a role at some point. We just had to be willing to step up and do it when the time called for it. So that stuck in my mind and my heart, my whole life. Being a part of a team, sometimes you just have to sacrifice, for the greater good of the team.
Hmm. You talked about at points looking at different players growing up or different athletes around you, saying that won't be me. Getting tempted by different things like going out and partying and drinking and drugs and all sorts of things that can draw an athlete away, that draw their focus away from being an athlete, I suppose. Um, what what was it that kind of kept you so focused on your athletics and in trying to get better in basketball?
Well, it was so easy as a kid for somebody to tell you what you can't do
Mhm.
and why you won't do it. And there were those examples um, around me in my communities that had excuses why it didn't happen for them. A lot of men that were in the military, good men that were definitely serving their country, but they had dreams of making it, um, doing more professionally, doing more in the sport, and a lot of them said, "Hey, I got trapped by a woman, got into a bad situation, or alcohol ruined me, injuries ruined me." So I was getting all this firsthand knowledge, like, okay, so these are the things that I need to worry about. These are the things I need to steer clear of if I want to be successful. I don't know if I can make it to the NBA, but I got to give myself a chance. And in order to give myself a chance, I have to make sure that I stay away from alcohol, minimize, my relationships. Those come naturally, and just focus on my road ahead and believe in myself. It's hard to like look out into the world and see a clear path
Mhm.
when you haven't seen it.
Mhm.
I didn't see anybody that was ultimately successful or made it to NBA. So I said, well, my first step is going to be graduate from high school and going to college,
Mhm.
and we'll deal with the rest after that.
Mhm. What was it that brought you to UConn?
It was that same mentality. Like guys, there were coaches that really believed in my ability to be better than what I was at that moment.
Mhm.
They saw potential in me. Um, they didn't you know sell me a bunch of lies or fibs about what it is that I could do or what they can do for me or where they could put me. You're going to be an NBA player. We're going to make you an NBA player. They told me things like, if you work hard, you can play for us and you can start.
Mhm.
You can have an integral part of this team. And I believed in that. I wanted a fair shake, but I also wanted to work for it. I didn't think anybody was going to make me something. It was going to be me making myself with the help of the coaches. And that's how they propped it up for me. They believed that any one of us could be successful, but it's how bad and how um, much sacrifice we're willing to make to achieve those particular goals. So I was like, these are the guys that I want to go with. And the campus is beautiful. The school is great, and I just felt like, you know, I needed to go somewhere where there weren't distractions and people were going to push me to be better than what I was at that current moment.
Mhm. Being from Connecticut, and I know you live in Connecticut, there are not a lot of distractions out there.
No.
Stores is way, way
Hmm.
tucked away in Connecticut. But you talked about the recruiting process and what the different feelings you had, the different coaches you met, and one experience in particular at Alabama, where I believe you pulled up next to a truck and a man made a gesture at you.
Yeah, and
And
I want people to read it, and I want
yeah.
them to kind of understand. It was something that happened to me that it didn't bother me.
Mhm.
I wasn't, I didn't tell many people about it, but it was, as a kid, and even still till today, who I am today, I just look at things and I observe, and you pay attention, and you get the information that you need, and then you have to make a decision. And there's not a lot that needs to be said. I knew exactly where I was.
Mhm.
I was in Alabama, and I knew what potentially I was going to have to deal with being in the South, and so that factored into my decision. Is
Mhm.
that something that I want to deal with for potential 4 years of college? And so, what I always tell every young person that has to make this decision: don't make a decision for your 70-year-old self. Make a decision for your 40-year-old self.
Mhm.
Make a decision that is going to put you in a situation where you're going to be proud of where you went to school because it really elevated you to the next level. You know, don't make a decision for a girlfriend or boyfriend, or um, for your parents, or for geographical uh, concerns, or even for weather.
Mhm.
Like, you have to really delve in and see what school is really going to push you and nurture you to grow and become the best person you're going to be. And you got to be willing to take that challenge and go on that journey.
Mhm. And you were one thing that I found interesting about this book is you were pretty honest about the different, whether it was a player or a kid at school or someone, you weren't really afraid to push back or to, I would, I guess, call it getting competitive. Whether it's certain exchanges just with some of your teammates or other people in your life. But I'm just curious, who was the player you had the most beef with in the sense of who are you most competitive with when you were on the floor?
Well, the one thing about sports is, you can never apologize for your rights to exist and to belong. And um, what I certainly believe that the probably the single greatest thing about sports is simply the opponent.
Uh-huh.
You know, without the opponent, we can't achieve what it is that we want to achieve for ourselves. We'll never recognize or understand what our greatest self is. So you have to respect your opponent,
Uh-huh.
and by respecting them, you have to go. It pushes you to work every single day because you know somebody's better than you. You can't be mad at your opponent. You can't, be angry because they're doing what they're supposed to do for you,
Uh-huh.
to make you this brilliant character, to make you realize your greatest heights. So, that's why at the end of every competition, for every kid, for every coach, you shake your opponent's hand, because without them, they wouldn't make you great. Um, so there's so many things that I dealt with good and bad teammates. And the one thing that I've always, and I've learned this myself, is that it's never personal. We're all trying to achieve the same goals. We all want to win. We all come from different backgrounds, and we see it differently. So that's why it takes getting to know um, who you're playing with, who you're playing against, to understand. Either you have to create an accord with them to go in the same direction to win, or you got to figure out what their weaknesses are so you could take advantage of them, so you could beat them. Um, and that's what sports is. But once you walk off that court, you're back to being human beings, and there's so
Mhm.
many more pressing issues that you have to deal with, that we have to deal with around the world.
Mhm. Was there one thing in this book that you didn't include that you wanted to?
There's so much.
Mhm.
There's so much. It's hard to encapsulate, everything that I've known, and everything that I've thought of, and every person that I've encountered, good and bad, that has inspired me. Um, there's so much more. And after writing this, I was like, wow, I could write two more books, because there's so much. And I've had people that have read the book already, and they said, well, how come you didn't add this in the book? I was like, it's like a movie. Like,
Mhm.
you can't add everything in there. You can just kind of stick with the script, the storyline, and you got to, follow it through. So um, there's so much. And one thing that I have been telling everybody is, we all have a story.
Mhm.
You don't have to be uh, an NBA player or a successful athlete to write a book to tell the story about your life. And there are people that look up to all of us, no matter what you do for a living.
Mhm. And that's very true with this book. I mean, as I was reading it, I knew your career path, particularly because you were at UConn and I
Hmm.
followed them growing up, and then I knew you jumped Midwest, West Coast back here. Um, but there was a lot in between I didn't realize that you went through, and maybe that other NBA players went through that we didn't realize, especially through the eyes of an NBA player. And as you were writing this, I guess this is a two-part question. One, why did you write this now? And two, um, what was your means of getting it to try and show fans and interested readers what it's like to be a professional athlete in the day to day?
Well, I wrote a book a long time ago, my first couple of years in the NBA, and I still have like the transcripts of it, a couple hundred pages. It just never went anywhere,
Mm,
and so I always wanted to do it. I've seen other people that write books, and I love the fact that when we look back on the lives of leaders of the past in America or around the world, like we have chronicles, we get to talk about people's lives, the things that they went through, and what made them who they are. And I think it is important for us to all. It's like people taking pictures now. We take so many pictures because we don't want to forget yesterday.
mhm,
So I always realize that to write a book, you know, we forget so much. Like I would love to see more about Bill Russell's career and hear more
Hmm.
about what he went through, and I'd love to have memoirs of Muhammad Ali and the things that he went through as those moments transpired. So, 50 years from now, can you imagine Bill Russell playing in the NBA 50 years ago?
Yeah.
Think about that.
It's hard to think about,
Yes.
actually. Yeah.
So in 50 years from now, I would love for people to be able to open up my book and talk about the things that, transpired in my life and what the state of the NBA was and,
Mhm.
kind of where we were thinking because these years go by fast and, we have to make sure that we talk about them and we chronicle them. And, it's life and it's so short, but we certainly have to talk about them and grow up our generations and bridge the gap so as they grow up, they continue to learn and build on what we've done in the past.
Mhm. When you contrast, or when you think about the career of Bill Russell, and you contrast the time that you played, and I would say we're on in a social media firestorm nowadays, but you were part of an era, or you are part of an era that social media was a really big part of how you played, or and how you were seen. Do you think that's good for NBA players or for professional athletes? How do you see it helping them having that sort of access and allowing that sort of access of people into their lives?
Well, I remember when we first started, there were a lot of guys when Twitter first came out, there were guys tweeting at halftime. And so fans knew that the guys were, on their Twitter feed. So they started, the minute halftime came, they started tweeting them because they knew they were looking at their phone. So there is a perfect balance that you have to strike when
Mhm.
it comes to social media. There's, so much that we have to deal with, stuff online and um, there certainly should be, as we kind of grow deeper into the online and the social media era, there's so much more that should be regulated when it comes to, the criminality of what goes on online and, how people use the internet. Um, but we have to use it as a tool to connect people
Mhm.
and to grow and to learn and not to bully
Mhm.
and to shame people. We have so many, we call them like keyboard gangsters.
Mhm.
It's important to spread the message of goodness and connectivity when you're online because you have that opportunity to shorten the world and bring people together. And that's how I think online and internet and social media should be used.
Ray, I know you have to wrap now, or we have to wrap and you have to run. Real quick though, did you ever consider being a coach?
Yeah, well, I have 5 children, and
Mm.
I'm certainly their coach. One thing I tell people is we wear so many different hats, and it's important which hat you have to know which hat that you're wearing at the current moment. So when I walk in the house, you think about a team, a GM, a owner, a coach, a player. Like we're all one of those types of people at some point through our day.
Mhm.
You have to understand when you're the owner. You can't be the owner when you walk home if you're married and act like the owner. You might just be a player.
Mhm.
So having kids of my own, I'm a coach to them, and they look up to me, and they call me incessantly throughout the day. Are you picking me up, Dad, from school? I got practice this time.
Mhm.
So I don't want to grow up and my kids call me coach,
Mhm.
or I want to be their dad, and I want them to remember me as their dad. And I was there always on a Saturday morning where they were playing their pickup games or whatever sports they were playing. So it's important for me to be there at least at these development ages for them.
Well, I know that's a 24/7 job. And I know
Yeah,
you wear a lot
yeah,
of
it
different
is.
hats. Yeah.
Yeah,
But Ray Allen, I know you have to run. Thanks so much for sitting with us for a few minutes here at ABC.
Thank-
Thanks to ABC News for putting this on the live stream. I'm Eric Malo for ABC News.
thanks, Eric.
Yep. Thanks, Ray.